Welcome to History at High Noon today. I'm Carol Morgan, director of the museum. At least that's what they told me I was, so that's what I'm doing. We are going to talk today, since it's me, we're going to talk about stories. Can you hear me? Okay. I talk louder. I can use my school teacher voice. That's not a problem. History is the story of people. And without the people, there is no history. Dr. Todd taught me that at Georgia Southern. Said if you don't know the people, you don't know the story. And so I have raised my granddaughter and now my grandson coming along to know about the stories. So when I take him to Jekyll Island and we ride the tram, he said, "Grandma, this is where that man did that and this and this and this." He listens to it intently and he knows the stories. And that's what, when I was teaching, I tried to do, make it a story about people you know. And to me, one of the biggest fallacies we have is when we teach Georgia history, we don't include Coffee County as pieces of it. So today we're going to talk about some stories, and the reason I get hooked on stories is because I question them. When a man marries a rich woman and they all put in the newspaper what a rich man he is and all this, I want to know how he got there if he wasn't on the back of his wife's daddy's money. That kind of thing. Because that makes a difference. And I used to tell students, you can't judge people 100 years ago from the way you live today. Because it's totally different. Women were second-class citizens at best. There were a few exceptions, Ada Slater's one of them, but basically that's why. Two little things when I first came, I started going through old newspapers. And there was this little blurb, you know how they used to do these little teeny tiny things in the article? That merchants that had bills for Miss So-and-so, please contact her husband. This was a lady that would walk around downtown shopping and she'd take this and she'd come over and she'd take this, and the merchants would write everything down because she was stealing it. And her husband had told them, just let her have it and I'll pay for it. And she did this for years until she was bedridden and in a wheelchair and couldn't go to town anymore. Also, a group of ladies, about 1920, went before the city commissioners, city leaders. It seems like there was two young ladies renting a house, and they were providing services for the males in Coffee County, and the wives wanted their men to know it. I'm sure they didn't, but anyway, the city made them leave town and told it's in the minutes of the city commissioner, that the rentor, the leasee man, whoever owned it, was not to rent to single women again. But I mean, that's history, folks. That's what makes it fun for kids to learn, because they see everybody like on, pedestals, and they were people. They were people. I picked out a few that I thought were most interesting, and because it's me, I picked out women. It's my prerogative. One of them, my sister brought to my attention when we did our first walk through the cemetery. May Woodruff Dale. She married James Williams. They lived in Randolph County and moved to Coffee County. What is so unique with her? From the year 2014 to 2021, she had 5 children. 3 boys and a set of twins, one girl and a boy. The second son lived 2.5 months. 2 of them were born at death, and the other 3 lived less than a year. Now, that is unique in itself, that all the children died as toddlers at the most. But what's interesting is, and when I did the walk, I kind of fibbed a little, told how she used to raise other people's children and all this kind of stuff, because that's what it was. It was a story. There is no census record of May Woodruff Dale or James William Dale anywhere. There's some Maydales and some James Dales, but they're not those two born those years that they were born. So what happened to them? That's what history is. We have a man that's buried in City Cemetery. He's Greek. It's got his birth date, his death date on his headstone, and he was born in Greece. That's it. There's nothing else. How did he get to Douglas, Georgia in 1919? I mean, things like that just intrigue me. That's what history's all about. But one of my favorite people is Ethel Frink, F-R-I-N-K. She was born in Florida. Her sister married J.W. Quincy, Judge Quincy. Most of us know them or know his daughter, Julie, anyway. So Ethel came to Douglas to live with her sister because her mother had died. She was in her middle teens. And she met the new dentist in town. And if you read the Gaskin Avenue book, everybody said, oh, it was love at first sight, love at first sight. Well, within a year, they were married. They married in October. In November, he contracted typhoid fever and died in November. They were married less than 4 weeks. So she went to stay with his parents for her grieving time. Then she moved back to Douglas. And when she moved back to Douglas, you know, if there's a single woman, all these married women want everybody to suffer, so they try to find them a man. So they pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. And she caught the eye of Marcus David Dickerson. They lived on Gaskin Avenue, across from the Baptist Church, not the one that's fallen down, but the one that's next to it. They courted, and she accepted his proposal with this statement: "You can have my hand, but you'll never have my heart." That tells you what kind of mindset she was in when she married a man that she didn't love. But to be accepted and to do and all, you could be a widow all your life, or you could get married and be active. That was just the way it was. They built the home on Gaskin Avenue in 1905. They married in December of 1904. I have this for my names and my numbers because I don't like either one of those things. She was real active in the Outlook Club, real big in the Woman's Club. She was district president and all this kind of stuff, but she was really active in the Episcopal Church. That took most of her time. She taught Sunday school from the day that church was founded until she died. She's like Miss Willie Pearl was at the Baptist Church. She was just there. They had 3 children, David, Will, and Ethel. I don't know where they get some of these names, but anyway, Ethel. That just doesn't. I think about Ray Stevens' song when I hear Ethel. So, Will became a lawyer. He worked for the Department of Labor in Atlanta. He had an office. He and his wife were building a home. They had 3 children. They lived here with his mom while he was in Atlanta until the house was built. He came to pick them up one weekend they were going to stay in a hotel in Atlanta and then move in the house. They picked the wrong hotel and the wrong time. The Weinkauf Hotel was supposed to be one that would never burn. It didn't actually burn. People died of inhalation of smoke or jumped from the building. So as they were on the top floor, the 16th floor, they suffocated him, his wife, and his 3 children. So Miss Ethel lost a son, a daughter-in-law, and 3 children. Okay? David, the other son, was an electrician. He helped build the Dukoff Hotel. He fell and got hurt. Now, a little side note here, because I have friends in Homerville where the Dickersons were from, and I've been to the library down there. All of those people, all the Dickerson men, were lawyers in politics. They were well known throughout, but they did have one bad habit. They loved the bottle. But see, you don't talk about things like that. That's something you don't talk about. David had his daddy's problem. He became an expert pilot, and he had a plane at the airport. He married a lady named Diane, and it didn't last very long. They had a daughter. David got sick and bedridden, so Miss Ethel took care of him 24/7 at her house. And Ethel, his sister, adopted their daughter. Obviously, the mother didn't want her, and David was dying. That's another blow to a mama. The last one, Ethel succeeded, kind of. She had a big playhouse, and there's a picture of it in the Ward's book, a big playhouse, and all the kids in the neighborhood would play. She married a doctor from North Carolina. She adopted her brother's child, and that's where they lived, and they had children and grandchildren and all that. But one thing that they didn't have was Ethel. Now then, it's funny how different people react to things, but Miss Ethel Dickerson, she took young wives in the community that were not from here under her wing. And one of her best friends was Miss Fryer, Miss Catherine Fryer. She worked for the Board of Education for years. But her husband had the same problem that Ethel's husband did. And they became really close friends. And one day, Miss Catherine asked her, said, "Wouldn't you just like to get rid of all your pain and suffering?" And she told the story about the giving tree. You take all your troubles, the town would take all their troubles, write them down, tie them on the tree. And she said, no matter what your trouble is, when you turn away from that tree, you'll take the ones that you have, and you'll survive them. So Miss Ethel was kind of a special lady. But several people have lived in that Dickerson house, the Whites especially, Stuart White's mom and dad, Eric. And my nephew said there is a woman that walked down the halls in that house. He said she didn't have any feet, just her long skirt. I don't know that it was Miss Ethel, but it might have been, could have been. But I do know from a lady that was alive and well, and still is alive and well in Douglas, that one of the things that they would do when Mr. Dickerson was having one of his spells is they would all retreat upstairs, because he kept a pistol by him in the living room and would shoot into the fireplace. Just because you have power and money does not mean your life is perfect. Okay? One of my other favorites, and I really would have liked to have known this lady, is Olive Polk Dent. She was a Polk from Ambrose. Her husband wrote her the sweetest love letters when they were courting about how he'd really love to work and give her the kind of life she needed and all this kind of stuff. And he did. So they married. They lived on Gaskin Avenue in that house that's falling down with the columns. Breaks my heart every time I go pick my grandson up at school and I see that house. But Miss Olive was an entertainer. She loved people and loved parties. Now, Mr. Dent made a lot of money in real estate, but his biggest purchase was when he bought the telephone exchange in Douglas. The Sweat Dent building is one that Sid owns on the corner. The third floor was a telephone exchange, the second floor was apartments, and the third floor was stores and storage. He bought it for, let me think, I want to check, I want to make sure, $8,000. He spent $8,000 for and it had 100 phones connected to it. Okay? Now, he sold it several years later, when in the 20s, for what is today would be $2 million. And he died soon after. So not only could Miss Olive still entertain, she could entertain lavishly, and she did. She always drove a black Buick, always, and I know the lady who portrayed her. She always drove a black Buick, and the neighbor's son, he was a Civic, where the Baptist church sits now was a Civic's home. And Jim Civic would drive the car for her so when she needed a chauffeur. And I thought that was so sweet. But anyway. She had children. She had 5 kids. James Lowell died when he was 7 months old. Mildred, Ethel, James Monroe, and Thomas Henry. Thomas's wife, on July 22nd, 1920, a few days after Mr. Dent had died, had twin boys. She had developed toxemia while she was pregnant. So after that, she was never well again. But she took the boys in the stroller to town one day and passed out downtown. They sent her to Waycross and she died 20 days exactly after her father-in-law died. So she lost a daughter-in-law and a husband in a month. Tom, who lost his wife and still had a son, he died tragically in 1935. Now, the boys had names, but they called them Mac and Jack. It was a mix, just names. Now, she had a live-in maid, a live-in nanny, and a live-in nursemaid. Miss Olive had a chef and 2 cooks that came every morning before sunrise, and they cooked 3 meals a day. She didn't have to work. Surprise, surprise. Quilla Ward was her husband's stepbrother, half-brother. He lived with Miss Olive. Ethel moved, went away, got divorced, came back with a son, James Ross. He went on a scouting trip and somebody hit him with a shovel and cut him right about here. And they cleaned it out and fixed it up and everything, and he died of tetanus about 5 days later. Olive was a severe diabetic. She lost a leg. But instead of getting her down, she moved her bedroom downstairs to the parlor so she could take care and watch what was going on. You got to admire a woman that does this. And most of the stories that we collect from Miss Olive are the time that the air base was here in town. She would open up her house. She had a music room, a drawing room, a living room, and a study. And 3 of the rooms would open up to the big entranceway. I mean, it's huge. It's probably, I'd say 9-10 feet across, the hall is. And open up the pocket doors. She'd have 3 jukeboxes, upstairs, downstairs, and on the porch. There'd be Coca-Cola machines outside. She hired extra cooks to make hors d'oeuvres and snacks and all this. And every weekend, she held her own USO. For not just the folks at the base, but Aunt Joanne and all the rest of them in Douglas, all the teenagers and all went. But she had chaperones. She had chaperones. And this happened every weekend, folks. A house full of people. You've got to admire a woman that loses family, loses a leg, and still keeps going that strong. I like strong women. She had a daughter. I'm trying to remember what her name is. I can't remember what it is now. Anyway, her daughter was special. That's what we'll call it. And she had a husband, Sam. He was a little special too. Matter of fact, one of the favorite things he had to do on the Sunday afternoon, he'd grill hot dogs or hamburgers outside on the front yard and charge the neighbors for them. And her son would come home on Saturday night in his cups, as they used to say, and he would harass his sister, push at the boy, and one night the boy had enough. And at 1:30 a.m. he came home one Saturday night, and the boy had a gun, and he shot him. This is at 1:30 in the morning. At 10 o'clock the next morning, his funeral was held at the Sims Funeral Home. There was no inquiry into the fatal accident at her home. This is what money does. This is what money does. You can't even get a mortician to get a body ready in 9 hours. I mean, you know, you just can't, but Miss Olive did. I just love these kind of stories. It just gives me chills. I wish I'd known some of these women from back then. Olive died in 1948, and the house has been here, there, and yonder, and it's fallen down. The vines are growing in the steps and around the post and everything. It's just, I just weep when I see that house. It's just terrible. But a strong woman lived there one time. We need to remember the past. And I know I harp on these women because when I start doing research and I say like Mrs. Jim Cottingham, like she doesn't have a name. You know, Mrs. Bill Ward, like she doesn't have a name. And that's what they did, and it was accepted, but I don't like it. So I fuss with this a lot. Another lady that I really admire is Ada Slater. And if you've ever talked to me about history in the museum, you've heard me talk about Ada Slater, because she is my hero. She married a man 20 years older, lost a son, he died. She married her one 20 years younger. And what was strange to me, we got all these old boxes of letters that he wrote her, and letters that his mother and his sister wrote him. And I wonder how such a smart woman couldn't see he had problems just by reading those letters. They went on their honeymoon, a tour of World War I battlefields that he had been on. That was clue number 2. Okay? So he's the one that hung himself. But Miss Ada managed her property, and she had lots. She had part of the Dukoff. She was on the Coffee County Bank before it was Coffee County Bank. She was on their board. Women couldn't even vote, and she was handling real estate and all this other. Now, she had a lawyer friend that rented office, and they, you know, I'm not saying she didn't have help, but she hung on to it all. She had no children, but she raised her nieces and nephews. She put them through school. One of them lived with her and worked and was saving up money to go to college. And she was going to South Georgia while she was here. And she told Miss Ada in the living room one time, and this is her story was told to us. The niece said, I told Aunt Ada that I wanted to go to New York to study, but I'd have to save up some money. And Aunt Ada said, wait just a minute. And she went upstairs, brought back a box, a metal box that locked. In it was all the money the girl had paid her for rent, because all for 2 years. And she said, here's your start-off money. But she was a strong woman. She kept going. She was in the Episcopal Church. She was really active, but she kept going. And these are stories that we need to share. Now, one of my other pet peeves is you don't tell your story. Your children don't know your story. Your friends don't know your story. They need to know. Because when you're gone, the story's gone. You understand what I'm saying? I tell this story all the time too, because this is what turned me around towards history. When I was 15, I'd take Papa Ray to Milan, Georgia to see all his relatives. And we'd get in the car, and I'd hear, this is where old Joe Mack had the first Coca-Colas in town. And this is where the old man, old so-and-so, had a bordello over here for the farmers. And this is where this one did this and that and the other. And all I could think of was I was 15 and I wanted to get back in town to Douglas to my friends and get him home. Now I can remember pieces, but I didn't listen well enough and I didn't remember. So your children need to know. Miss Joyce told us some stories about her time, her memories of World War II. Her children need to know that. Because when she's gone, they may want to know something about how Mama did this or that or whatever, or what Mama experienced, and it's not there anymore. So that's why I love stories. They're history. It doesn't matter if all you did was a sharecropper. Tell your story for anybody, okay? And I have got some cheat sheets up here. If you want to get one before you leave, they're on this podium, on the table there. It's little key points for you to get started on. And if you file one out, let me know. We'll type it up. We'll put it in the museum in a file with your name on it. And then when they come back looking for it, I can say, I got it. Does anybody have any questions? There are other stories I can tell. Does anybody remember the Cotton Club?
Yes, thanks.
The Cotton Club was on the West Green Road, right about where Herbert Hand's white brick house sits, and you turn. It was a gentleman's club. They sold alcohol, and there was at that time, even at the club out by Gaskin Springs, which started out as a church campground. They had a club and a pool out there. There was no time limit. They could serve all day long, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But they also had some ladies of the evening in the back rooms at the Cotton Club. And a gentleman from West Green was visiting some friends there. And when we did the West Green history, his granddaughter was alive at that time and told me I couldn't print that story. But he left the Cotton Club with a female friend, because he was too drunk to drive. And on the way to West Green on the dirt road, the car flipped and killed him. And then the girl had to explain to the crazy wife all the goings on. It's so much fun. I just love it. It's so much fun. It just proves, I used to tell students all the time, nobody was perfect. I don't know that George Washington ever chopped down a tree because he wouldn't tell a lie. I don't know all that. It's a good story, but I don't know. But some of the best stories are the bad ones. And when I was talking to a group of high school kids the other day, well, it's been 2 years now, it was before COVID. And they were going to do personal histories. They were going to get their parents' personal history. And I said, ask them tough questions. Did you drink and drive? Did you go to a club? Because now I swear I didn't go to these two, Mama. There were 2 clubs in Coffee County when I was in high school. One was on the Nichols Road and another one was in the woods. But we didn't want to go because Dan Polk, who lives in Ambrose, said, you can't go in unless you keep your back to the door. Well, I knew I couldn't do that, so there wasn't no need for me to go. But I mean, those kind of places existed, and they had people of power in them. So nobody is perfect. That's what I want everybody to understand in history. There's all faults. Now you hear these stories of the true story behind this and the true story behind that. The only one that knows the true story is gone. You can surmise that nobody was perfect and this probably wasn't as good as he thought he was going to do. So big deal. Big deal. The lots. Mr. Elias told me this story two Lot brothers came and they settled at Long Hill. One of them had a wife and they had 15 children. And the neighbor lived down the road about 2 miles, and she was a single lady and had 5. When she died, Mr. Lot went and buried her at Central Baptist Church. He came back, loaded up the children in the wagon and all their belongings, and took them to his wife and said, "These are my children. These are my children." How would that happen today? They just put them in another house in another town. One of my favorite heroes, though, and this is back from the 1800s, and this is Bill's ancestor. Priscilla Gillis Ward. No, Graves. Graves. Right? Graves. See, I told you I needed my paper. She married a Ward. He died. They had 3 sons. Several years later, she married a Hargraves, John Hargraves from England. And after the Revolutionary War, he decided he wanted to go back, and she said she wasn't going. He said, "My sons are." And she said, "Oh, no, they're not." So he took off to Charleston, South Carolina, to see a lawyer about taking his sons. And this is the time when people were leaving North Carolina, South Carolina, coming south to Indian Territory. So she, her 6 boys, a mule, and a horse, and 2 horses for hauling stuff, got in line while he was going to start Charleston, South Carolina. They didn't stop in Telfair County, Montgomery County. They came into Coffee County, settled out 5 miles east of Douglas, next to, or near to, 17 Mile Creek. They had a log house, dirt floor with clay on top, keep the dust down, and she raised her boys. The cemetery for that family is on the intersection there of the bypass road and 32. Her grave is there, but it's not marked. Now the other story is, her daddy's name was Abram, so she had 2 sons named Abrams. One was Adam Ward and one was a Hargraves. Abram Hargraves was found by the Savannah Bank when they were looking for him because his daddy had money for him. So every year, Hargraves would load up his wagon with his crop and all this stuff. He'd take a week to Savannah, leave his crop, sell it off, get his gold coins, it was gold coins, and come back a week to Coffee County. He did this for several years. And in 1930, I think, they sent him a settlement in 1930 of $70,000. Gold. It's all gold. It was all gold. Now, there's no mention of him sharing it with his brothers or anybody else, but he had that. His daddy's family had property. He was a younger son, but he still had property. He left them and made more money in England, and when he died in 1930, Abram got it. Just like that. Just amazing to me. Now, a lot of this is in Ward's History and Gaskin Avenue book. But you got to ask questions. You got to see where the blank spots are and fill in something, find out something. That's what makes it fun. Anybody got a question? I probably won't know answers, but I don't mind questions.
So what's your story?
My story? Oh, God Almighty. Let's do a condensed version. I was born in St. Mary's Hospital in Athens. I used to tell all my friends there's a plaque on the wall that said Carol Ray was born here. And one of them, back in the 60s, you have to know the 60s to do that. My sister was dating Billy Cowart, and he went by to make sure. He said, "They ain't a plaque with your name on it." And then somebody told him he should have checked Effie's. And if you don't know what Effie's is, it's all right. We won't go into that. Daddy was in the Army. We moved to Indiana. My sister was born. He was training troops for Korea. And then we came back to West Green to farm. I grew up at West Green, went to West Green Elementary School, came to Coffee High School in her 9th grade in '64, graduated in '68. Loved high school, love it. If I could have got a social grade, I'd have been a straight A student. But I was in the pep club and all this kind of stuff. I just loved socializing. As the older I get, the less I really like it. You know, I'm real choosy about it. Went to school at Georgia Southern, became a teacher, taught social studies, surprise, surprise. And after I had a group of students, I decided I needed to go get my master's in something else. So I got it in library science and then media specialist, and then I became an instructional media specialist with a 6-year degree. I got married, had a son. He's got 3 grandchildren, 24, 22, and 5. And the 5-year-old, since my husband passed away, stays with me every night. If he's at his mom and dad's, he'll say, "It's dark, I got to go home." So they work at the hospital in Bacon County, so their hours are weird. So I have to bring him to school because they're at work at 7 o'clock. When I retired, I didn't learn to say no fast enough. I got in retired educators. Now I'm a state officer. Mr. Chris Trowell talked me into being president of the Historical Society. He said it's just for 1 year. That was in 2014. This is a job, it's like the Supreme Court Justice. You realize that they don't want it. Nobody wants it. So the city got us to manage the museum, and I reached a milestone Friday. When we entered this museum, they had things in file cabinets. They were not in files, they were not organized, they were just stuffed in. And Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock, everything is filed, labeled, organized, and category. So I just danced. Took me 2 years and 3 months. I'm active. I'm not still very much. I was really active in our church before it burned. Our church burned a year ago in February, and we're in the process now. We've got plans building it back, but I was active with our senior group and all that. I just do. My mama told my grandmother, if you don't do, you can't do. If you don't move, you can't move. So I took her at her word. My mother will soon be 93, and I hope to live that well that long. So that's my story, the printable kind. Anybody else got a question?
Harold, have you got any stories about the house Leslie lives in now?
Oh, yeah, that house.
On Ward Street.
Yeah. I'll tell you one that Nora told me, Miss Nora. I called her one day, but this is for Jim and I went to take pictures. We went in and documented that house. And I talked to Miss Nora, and she said, "Well, I'll tell you what, that man just lost that house." I said, "You showed it today?" She said, "Yes." "Do you know what he did?" He said, "We walked out and he lit up a cigarette and he put it out on my concrete banister." And she said, "I told the real estate agent he couldn't have it no matter how much money he had." And I believe her. I believe her. That is the most amazing house to me, to be intact. It's the only Sears house left standing intact. There were other houses in Douglas, but the walls have been moved and everything, but that house with one family is as it was. They did add on a bathroom, I think, in the back upstairs. Wasn't that what it was back there, Jim? When you took pictures, upstairs, wasn't there a bathroom?
Yeah.
Okay. But the well, when we were there, the well has water in it. And I wanted to know, because I found out if you have a well in the city, because when my nephew bought a house, he had a well in his yard. And he's wanted to use that water. He said, all you got to do is get it tested from the health department and you can use that well. I did not know that. But that water was clear. It was clear. We couldn't reach down that far to get it, but it looked good.
Carol, which house is that?
Vickers house, Lewis Vickers house by the post office, was the post office.
426 East Ward.
Yeah.
Yep. But it's just like it was. You could even, I'm sure she's fixed it by now, but in the living room, you could see where the hardwood floors, the rugs had been. They'd been there all that time. And this is heart pine. And those Sears houses came with everything. The nails, the board, the plan, everything. They had little water fountains in the hall and in was it the kitchen? 3 rooms, the hall and was it kitchen? I can't remember.
In the dining room.
And the dining room. The only thing that they had changed was where the fireplace tiles and all were, they put a gas line in, you know, when you had gas heaters. And that was kind of sad, but I mean, the woodwork in there is all just wonderful.
Some people don't know
Wonderful.
what a Sears house is.
Huh?
Some people don't know what a Sears house is.
Sears Roebuck sold house plans and houses. I figured everybody ought to know that. It was a kit. It came by train. And Miss Nora used to have the invoice with she used to have how many boards and how many nails and all that on it. Her daughter told me that. Nora didn't tell me that. Her daughter told me that. But it's
Still alive, and Jane is too.
yeah. But the daughter teaches she's a retired teacher in Pearson, but she's teaching now again. But it's just I just love history. And I always loved old houses. And I will admit, an old house is like an old woman. It takes a lot to keep them up, but it's worth it. It's worth it. Because one thing that I admire about most places in Europe, if you go to Ireland, they'll build right up to that old stone fence where that house was. But they won't tear it down. We get a bug in the United States to build something, we'll tear down the shrine, whatever. We just want to get rid of the old and put up something new. But in Ireland especially, they have such reverence and awe for the past. You'll find half of a house in the middle of a field. And it's just standing there all beautiful, and they'll weed around it and take care of it and all this, but they don't tear it down. We'd put up a Hardee's. So, you get me on my bandwagon, I get going. Forgive me. Anybody else got a question? I thank y'all for coming. Chris Adams is supposed to be here next week, and if you've ever heard Chris Adams, you'll know it'll be a good program. So, thank y'all. See you later.